Storytime about my roommate's crazy girlfriend. I'm a lesbian living with my good friend who's a guy. I own the apartment and rent out the room to him. A month ago, he met a girl online and they started dating. She's constantly at our place and I'll be honest, I don't like her. She's always been incredibly rude and standoffish towards me. I eventually learned that it's because she thought I had a thing for my roomie even after he told her I was gay, to which she replied that I don't look gay. A few weeks ago at a kickback at our place, I pulled her aside telling her that I really am gay and I hope that we could be friends. She seemed to take this very well and was overly friendly with me for the rest of the night. The next day, my roommate wanted to talk to me, saying that his girlfriend feels uncomfortable around me after I drunkenly hit on her. What? I wasn't drunk at all and I'm not attracted to her whatsoever. I explained to my roommate what really happened and he was skeptical but took my word for it, chalking it up to a miscommunication. A week later, we had another kickback and his girlfriend was there, of course. I was cordial but stayed away so another miscommunication wouldn't happen. Towards the end of the night, another friend said to me, "Dude, what's going on? She's telling everyone that you've been hitting on her all night." I was pissed off and went up to her in front of everyone saying, "What the hell's going on? Why are you speaking lies about me hitting on you to all my friends?" Part 2 of my roommate's crazy girlfriend. She stared at me, unable to respond. Then I said, "Just because I'm gay doesn't mean that I'm into you. Trust me, I'm not the least bit interested in you." She started sobbing and spewing BS, so I kicked her out and told her that she's not welcome anymore for making me uncomfortable in my own apartment. Her and my roommate both left, and he was super pissed at me. He didn't come back for a while, but I got some angry texts. However, I stood my ground about her not being welcome anymore. I told him he was free to stay or move out as he pleases. Most of her friends were on my side. Nearly a week later, my roommate returned home and he was giving me the silent treatment. I figured I'd just leave him alone and let him get over it. Then his girlfriend started calling me and demanding that I give the phone to him because he apparently wasn't speaking to her. I told her to kick rocks and that I wasn't getting in their business anymore. Soon after, my roommate finally started talking to me again. Turns out they got into a huge blowout fight and his girlfriend admitted that she wanted me to flirt with her just to prove that she could pull a lesbian. He told her that was messed up and then broke up with her on the spot. She wouldn't stop blowing up our phones for weeks until I finally blocked her number. It's been a few months and my roommate moved out. We're definitely not as close, but we're still good friends. His ex-girlfriend recently came out as bisexual on social media. How ironic. Storytime about how I was manipulated by a nurse in a psych ward. When I was 19 years old, I was admitted to a psychiatric ward for women for attempting to unalive myself. Most of the other women there were also there for this reason and for personality disorders. We were long-term patients who were held there against our will for our own safety. Me and some of the other women had our favorite staff members, one of which was a male nurse. He was 35 years old, seemed nice, always had our backs, and would often talk about his son in personal life. This made us all feel comfortable with him. Some days, a group of us would be allowed to go off the premises with a staff member and hang around the town for 2 hours. However, some things weren't allowed, such as using the phone while we were out in case a phone call upset us, or mood-altering drinks such as energy drinks or alcohol. Since our freedom was restricted most of the time, we'd always ask for him to be the one who took us. He would let us buy drinks and go off on our own. He would also let us use a phone to make calls to our family, buy us food and cigarettes. He even drove back the long way so we wouldn't have to be back so soon. At the time, we didn't really know why he would be so nice and lenient because he could lose his job letting us do those things. However, one day out of the blue, he was suspended, and this is when we found out what was really going on. Part 2 of how I was manipulated by a nurse in a psych ward. When he was suspended, we were all confused. It turns out that he was getting sexual favors from some of the women in exchange for giving us more freedom. Some of the women were so unwell that they didn't know what he was doing was wrong. We were all sectioned off and they were extremely strict with us since we didn't have the capacity to make rational decisions. This gave them power over us. After all, we were in a place that was meant to keep us safe. The only reason it got out is because one day, another staff member was searching the patient's room and found a phone. Once confronted, the patient admitted how they received the phone and what they had to do for it. He was manipulating us so that in return for our freedom, we would have to do something for him. Some of us were shocked because he always talked about his son who was 5 years old, telling us about their weekends. He didn't seem like a monster. Luckily, it never happened to me, but it happened to the friends I made there. After he was suspended, some of the women had to take it to court. It was obviously traumatic as they were already there for serious mental health issues. Some of the girls had to have additional therapy for it as well since it was essentially assault. We never found out what happened to him or if he went to prison. Sadly, one of the girls I know is still very traumatized by it. Storytime about how my dad tried to kill me. When I was a kid, my dad was very abusive towards me and my mother. He was an alcoholic and a drug user, and he would beat us almost every night. Most nights, we would sleep in the car because we were too afraid to go home. My mom was terrified of throwing him out because he would make crazy threats like telling us he'd burn the house down with us inside if she ever tried to leave him. Eventually, when I was 12 years old, she built up the courage to do it. She packed his things while he wasn't home and changed the locks. He was furious. Over the next few years, we had to call the police a total of 73 times because he wouldn't leave us alone. When I turned 14, he stopped and he was radio silent for the next 4 years. Fast forward to when I was 18, I was contacted by an old family member who told me that my dad was sick. They also told me that he didn't have much longer left to live. As badly as he hurt us in the past, he was still my dad and I wanted to make peace with him before he passed away. I wrote him a letter, found his current address, and went to post it. As I reached the front door, he opened it. He told me he was just about to commit suicide and wanted me to come inside and talk. I felt sorry for him and I walked in. As soon as I stepped foot inside, he slammed the door and locked it. This is when my nightmare began. Part 2 of how my dad tried to kill me. For the next 3 hours, he tortured me endlessly and beat me. During this time, the realization had set in that he was never dying and it was just a ploy to lure me in. I was in agonizing pain and I thought that I was going to die. He kept spewing hateful words and telling me that he was going to kill me. He had dragged me upstairs and at one point he threw me down the staircase. When I reached the bottom, my head smashed through a window. He was at the top of the steps, looking at me, and I knew he was about to come down and finish the job. I felt like I was going to pass out, but the last bit of fight I had left in me saw the side door and made a run for it. By some miracle, the door was unlocked and I managed to escape. As I sprinted home, I could hear his footsteps running behind me for half of the journey, but the adrenaline coursing through my veins was pushing me. My lungs were on fire, but I knew that if he got a hold of me, that would be it. He eventually stopped running after me and I made it home. I suffered extensive injuries both physically and mentally. A week later, I found out that he slit his friend's throat the same night inside of a store, but luckily he survived too. When I was 19, he was sentenced to 11 years in prison for that attempted murder. I never went to the police because I was scared and naive, but I'm 24 now and healing. Storytime about how a stranger tried to trick me into joining a swingers club. I woke up late one morning for class and I was in a rush. I threw on a hoodie and some leggings and ran out of the house looking like a mess. When I got to my car, I noticed it was raining outside, but despite this, I was still speeding trying to make it on time. This idea turned out to be as bad as it sounds and I ended up rear-ending an SUV. I was super broke at the time and didn't have money to pay any sort of deductible. The guy I hit introduced himself as John and made sure that I was okay. To my surprise, he acted like it was no big deal and told me not to worry about the small amount of damage. He immediately got off topic and asked me if I'd be interested in going to a women empowerment seminar that he was hosting. When I politely declined, he told me that he'd only forget about the damage to his SUV if I attended one of the classes. He started ranting about how he's trying to help people and empower women and explained that he's trying to expand his classes. I agreed and he gave me a flyer with the information. I showed up late to a meeting and discovered pretty quickly that it wasn't as innocent as John advertised. Everyone there seemed a bit off, and John was going over various techniques of how to intimately empower women. I also noticed the people I was sitting next to were giving me intimate looks. It only got weirder from here. Part 2 of how a stranger tried to trick me into joining a swingers club. John told me the class was all about empowering women, but this wasn't what I had in mind. I finally got up to leave and John immediately noticed. He saw me in the small audience and told the rest of the class to welcome me and explained how I agreed to attend one session. All eyes were on me at this point, so I decided to sit back down and put the attention back on the instructor. He then continued explaining various methods on how to intimately empower women and couples. Next, he picked 2 people, a man and a woman, to come up to the front of the class to demonstrate. It was kind of like a train wreck that I didn't want to see, but I couldn't look away. At the end of the class, John led us to another room where full-blown activities were going on, if you know what I mean. That's when it finally hit me that this was some type of swingers club. I immediately slid out from the crowd and headed towards the door. That's when John caught up with me and handed me a flyer for the next event. I went home in disbelief and told my roommate about what just happened. I told her about the car wreck, how I got tricked into going to this crazy class, and about that weirdo John. Her reaction was the exact opposite of what I thought it would be. She told me it sounded cool and asked for the flyer. She ended up going to the next class with her boyfriend and is now a regular with John's group. I have feelings for my coworker, but I'm engaged. I work in the medical field in a busy hospital. It feels like we've been short-staffed forever and it never seems to improve. This leads to us having to work double shifts almost daily. The money's great, but I'm rarely ever home. Sometimes we even sleep at the hospital and don't go home for days at a time. The people I work with are amazing and almost like family. At the moment, I see them more than my actual family. We all look out for each other and we're super close. But some of us might be a little too close. There's this guy I work with named Jason that I've developed feelings for. When you're with someone almost 16 hours a day, I guess it's bound to happen. The problem is that I'm already engaged to my fiance at home. It started out innocent at first. Casual, light flirting here and there, so subtle at times I didn't even think anything of it. One of those situations where you start out as friends, but things keep progressing. I knew my relationship was in jeopardy when Jason and I started texting when we weren't working. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't stop the conversations. If I'm being honest, at times I would be the one to text first and take the conversation away from the friend zone. I haven't talked to my fiance about it and I'm scared to death too. I still love him and feel terrible that I have feelings for someone else, and I haven't even gotten to the worst part of it all. Part 2, I have feelings for my coworker, but I'm engaged. I didn't tell my fiance about Jason because I felt like this was only happening because I was never home. I felt like hardly seeing him had to be the root cause of this mess. I talked to him about making more of an effort to see each other despite my crazy schedule. This worked for a little while, but I still had feelings I couldn't deny for Jason despite trying to suppress them. I even told Jason that we had to keep things strictly professional from now on, to which he agreed. However, this agreement didn't last long. Jason and I were assigned to work in the same area for the next month. One night when we were on break together, he started telling me how much he missed talking to me like we used to. One thing led to another, and we ended up making out in the break room. This was the first time it actually got physical between us, but sadly it wasn't the last. I'm ashamed to say it happened a few more times. At this point, I knew this couldn't keep going on, so I made the decision to break up with my fiance. I quickly found out that this was the wrong choice. Shortly after, I found out that Jason was sleeping with another girl at work. I was crushed and completely cut him off. I realized I made a mistake and tried to reach out to my fiance, but it was too late. I got distracted by what could have been and lost track of something great that I already had. I still regret it to this day. Crime Fanatic Friday, the serial killer who fed his victims to pigs. In 2002, police raided a pig farm owned by Robert Pickton to execute a search warrant for illegal firearms. However, what they uncovered led to a horrifying investigation that would cost the Canadian government $70 million. In the 80s and 90s, there was a spike in missing women. These women were all in high-risk positions such as sex workers, runaways, addicts, and women suffering from mental health illnesses. Picton honed in on these vulnerable women by luring them to his farm with promises of money, drugs, and shelter. He would perform sexual acts with them and then talk them into letting him handcuff them. Once they were bound, he would ruthlessly torture them and murder them. In 1997, Picton led a woman to his property and attempted to handcuff her. When she resisted, he became violent and stabbed her in the stomach. She managed to wrestle the knife away from him and stabbed him back, then ran to the road where she flagged down an oncoming vehicle. They both arrived at the same hospital for treatment, which is where he was later arrested. He was charged with attempted murder, assault, and forcible confinement. However, the charges were eventually dropped because the woman was an addict and not considered a competent witness. After this incident, women kept going missing and it would be another 5 years before police would uncover the chilling truth. Crime Tonight Friday Part 2, the serial killer who fed his victims to pigs. Rumors swirled within the sex worker community that there was an active serial killer long before investigations took place. In 1999, the police had another opportunity to arrest Robert Picton when a sex worker and addict told police she had seen a woman's body hanging in Picton's slaughterhouse. However, when questioned by police, she denied the story. She later confessed that it was true, but she lied due to being dependent on Picton for money. Despite Picton consenting to a police search, no investigation was completed. This led to him becoming more confident with killing and getting sloppy when hiding any potential evidence. A worker on Picton's farm informed police that several women's IDs were seen on the property. However, they told him that an eyewitness or physical evidence was needed. In 2002, another employee reported personally seeing illegal firearms on the property. That's when they were able to execute a search warrant. A massive investigation was done and they uncovered multiple missing women's belongings. They never found complete bodies, only fragments such as teeth, hair, or small bone pieces. Police believe that Picton would murder, dismember, and feed his victims through a meat grinder before discarding their remains into pig pens. In 2007, Picton was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years.